All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. We're going to get started with our webinar this morning, creating APIs for the COVID-19 response efforts. If you'd like to follow along in real time, feel free to download Postman in advance. So with us on the line, we have Ken Lane. He's our Chief Evangelist here at Postman. And I'm Hannah, our Technical Community Manager here at Postman. So here's our agenda for the day. We'll go over some introductions on what the project is. We'll talk about API collections, some blueprints for publishing new ones, testing location site, Postman for nonprofits, and we'll do a Q&A at the end. We'll also be doing Q&A throughout the session. So we'll keep your eyes there on the Q&A section, and we'll be jumping in where we can. For a few housekeeping items, the session time will be about 60 minutes, and we'll be sure to leave some time for Q&A. We are recording this webinar, and we'll share that recording in the next few days. For now, chat's on, but we might disable that if it's too high of a volume. For attendees and panelists, we don't have any audio or video on. If you have any questions during the webinar beyond the Q&A, please feel free to post on Twitter. Tag #GetPostman and hashtag it as Postman Webinar. And again, if you'd like to follow along in real time, download Postman in advance. So APIs of COVID-19. When this pandemic hit, many of us have been looking for ways to put our technical skills for good. In a time where situations evolve so rapidly, having up-to-date and accurate information shows both the scope of what we're facing and informs us on decisions to make from that data. And information exchange is what APIs do best. So we've started the COVID-19 API Resource Center. There are 4 main parts to this. We've compiled a list of API collections for people to use with reputable information. We're also going to show you blueprints for how to publish new APIs from existing data sets. For testing locations, we've put together a microsite for all the different testing locations in several states in the US. So we'll be showing you kind of how that data is used to publish an API that you can use in the future. And we'll run through our new program, Postman for Nonprofits. So this project is crowdsourced. While we started it off as a Postman team, this is something that our community is already contributing to a bunch. And the main point of it is working together as an API community to work for the common good. And there are a couple ways to contribute to this project. We'll walk through the kind of technical details a little bit after this. But if you find a great API you'd like to add to our list of API collections, create a collection and submit an issue on GitHub, or feel free to email us at covid-19@postman.com. If you hear of any testing locations for COVID-19, also please email those in. And we're looking for community leaders to step up and get more involved with this project. If this is something that you're passionate about or feel like you have some time and energy to dedicate, we'd love to bring you on board and share the responsibility with this with many more of you. So from here, I'm going to hand it off to Ken, and he'll show us about running a COVID-19 API collection in Postman.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Hannah. Appreciate it. So what I'm gonna walk you through kind of everything that we've built today and all the different ways that you can get involved in what we're doing around COVID-19 here at Postman. So like everyone else here, as Hannah said, we're all just kind of hit by this, and we're trying to figure out what we can do. Because we're Postman, that's going to be API related. And because Postman is kind of the central tool when it comes to not just us at our company, but also how you work with APIs, it's a natural fit for helping people find ways of finding data and coping and making sense of what's going on. So what we did is we began with building API collections. If you're not familiar with an API collection, what an API collection is, it's a portable container that can define one or many different API requests. So if you're calling the Twitter API, you can save that as a collection, and then you can share that with other people, and you can publish it on websites. And that's what we've done here is when this first hit, I just started going out looking for, well, how can APIs make a difference? How can they make a change in any way about what's going on? And the first that I landed on was these top three, which are what I would consider more informational API collections for World Health Organization, Center for Disease Control in both the US and Europe. And these pull from those organizations' Twitter accounts using the Twitter API. They pull any videos, informational videos published to their YouTube channels using the YouTube API. And then it pulls data using RSS feeds that are available from news feeds and other updates from these organizations. So using that collection, you can pull that data, aggregate it, and work with it if you're looking to stay in tune with these organizations. So that was kind of the first step, just kind of understanding what's out there, what's going to help. Information from these organizations is obviously going to make an impact. But beyond that, I started actually finding quite a few APIs out there that were popping up with actual data. And you can see there's quite a few of them here. We've been creating some of these ourselves. People have stepped up and created their own Postman collections. And then we have a GitHub repository where we have a whole list of issues that the community is kind of tackling when it comes to finding APIs, creating collections, and then we're adding them to this list. So this list is growing every week. If you know of any APIs that should be here, feel free to submit a GitHub issue, or as Hannah said, email, and we can see about adding it to the list. So to help kind of show and demonstrate what's possible here, I wanted to actually test drive one of these API collections for you. There's quite a few good ones. A couple of my favorites are the COVID tracking project and the novel COVID API. So I'm going to do the COVID tracking project. If you want to just see what it's all about and see what's going on with it, you can click on the documentation, and it'll show you all of the individual requests that can be made for this API. And so there's a list of them here, and this is a public API, so it doesn't require authentication, which makes it nice and easy. But if you'll see on any Postman documentation, you'll see a run in Postman button up here. We've also listed them on the page, so you can bypass the documentation if you just want to run in Postman. So if you click on the run in Postman button, and I'm on a Mac, if you're in Windows, it'll give you prompts. And I've got my Postman desktop client over here on the right, and you'll see it just dropped this collection in here. So this matches the documentation. You can see I've got a handful of API requests here, same as on the documentation. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the state's current. And what Postman is it's an HTTP client. So it allows you to make calls to APIs and pull that data. Think of Postman as a kind of hybrid between a browser and a spreadsheet. So you can browse your APIs using URLs just like you can in a browser. You've got tabs here. You can load different URLs. And oh yeah, I'm sorry, my team's telling me I gotta zoom in a bit, because that is a pretty common problem that people can't see due to the size of the font. So let me zoom in on my web browser. Let me zoom in here on my Postman client, and to make it all easier for you guys to see, because now how great it can be to look at this. All right, so hopefully that helps out a little bit. So we've got our browser tab open here. I've got a URL for COVID tracking API states, and I'm gonna just hit send. And now I can see the state responses in a JSON format here. So I can get at any of these individual API requests. I can pull the state's daily numbers, and it shows me the JSON response for each of these. And so that's kind of the basic functionality of a collection. If it's a public API, it makes it a lot easier to work with because you don't have to deal with authentication and authorization. And then once I'm making calls to these, I can save the responses. I can do other things with it. You've got code snippets over here. If you need to grab a PHP or a JavaScript snippet to make a call to each of these APIs. So it really helps you get going when you're actually building something on top of one of these APIs. making this entire API really portable and something you can work with in your Postman client. So that's the kind of fundamentals of Postman. I did want to show you one of these informational ones. Let's take the WHO, because it's going to require some authentication, and it's helpful to understand how that works, because that's one of the stumbling points for a lot of APIs and new users getting up and going with APIs. And so in my Postman here, I've got a second collection for the World Health Organization. I've got a Twitter and a YouTube endpoint. If I click on Twitter here, you'll see the authorization tab is green. And in here, it requires a handful of keys that you can get from Twitter. So I can't get those for you. I wish I could make that easier, but Twitter requires every user who's going to be pulling the data get their own set of API keys. So on the documentation, there's step-by-step how to do this. You just got to go to dev.twitter, sign up, and start a new application, and then grab these values. There's 4 values, and you can either paste them in here, or I'm using environments to work to store and abstract these away. But then you do the same for YouTube. There's a YouTube API key here that's needed, and then you can start making calls to those APIs. So it's just a little extra step you have to take, but both of those APIs require you to be authenticated. So hopefully that shows the kind of scope of the different types of API collections that we've built. And I'll pause there. Any good questions, Hannah, coming up yet that I should address?
Yeah, we have one question about asking to use Swagger as well for these API calls.
Yeah, so if you come across any API that's got Swagger or Open API, you can import that. So it'll help you get started. There's an import button up here next to the big orange button. Sorry, my zoom's in the way and I can't get to it. And you can either paste that Swagger right here directly, or you can just upload it and import it. And it'll auto translate that Swagger into a collection and allow you to start making calls. Sometimes there's some tweaking and polishing you got to do to get it to work. Sometimes the Swagger definitions aren't entirely complete, but they really are a time saver in helping you get started. And Postman tries to make that as easy as possible with importing. So, any
Awesome.
others?
Yeah, thanks for walking us through that, Ken. We have a question as well about collections and if they also include environments.
So some of the collections do include environments. So when you're, it's one of the benefits of going to the documentation is you can click in and you can see, let me click in one, see if I can remember which ones have environments here. If it's got an environment, it'll show up here. That one does not have an environment. Let me see. So not all of them are going to have, let's see, COVID-19 Twitter searches. I think this one had an environment. Yep. So right here, the environment will show right here. And this is, you can see why it's called publish, because when I'm publishing a collection, I'll create a starter, an environment to help people get started. And I always name them publish because I don't want to accidentally publish one that has my secrets in it and make it publicly available to everyone. So it's a way that I separate that out. But yeah, some of these will have environments, but not all of them do. If they're public APIs, there's no need. You don't need those secrets or tokens or keys. But then when some of these other collections are created by users, I mean, we have a whole variety of users building them. I think we've got the novel COVID's made by a pretty young team that's in college. I think one of them might be in high school, and they're publishing them themselves. So there's quite a few of these that we don't have control over, but we've listed, and they may or may not have environments. And we're trying to encourage people to plug those in. But those are some great questions because those are kind of the fundamentals of how you get going with collections. Swagger is a big key, and then environments really help it make it easier for you to get up and going. So those are two collections now that we have in our demo workspace here that show how we can work with public APIs like the COVID tracking project, or we can work with informational APIs that are pulling Twitter for specific organizations via Twitter, via YouTube, and getting information. I did the WHO and CDC, but really you could do that with any type of organization. So that helps you kind of put APIs to work for you that are existing APIs. But Postman is a platform that really helps you think through not just the consumption of APIs and being an API client, but also publishing APIs. We can actually help you make APIs available. Excuse me. So I wanted to kind of walk through some of those concepts, because as I was working with the team to go through, well, what type of APIs would really make the biggest impact, I kept coming across ideas for data that was needed, but there was no API. Couldn't find that data, especially early on when we started and not all of these COVID APIs existed. Obviously, people are thinking the same things as me, and they built those APIs and published them with Postman. So we started playing with other ways of helping people pull the data that they need. So a lot of times when you're looking for data and out there on the web, you'll find the data you need, but it's not available in an API. It's available on a website. And so we started creating collections to help make sense of that. And I call these scrapei's, which is a mouthful when you try to say it or spell it. But it really describes what we're trying to do here, turning the web, scraping the web and turning it into machine readable data that you can use in an API. And so one of the first that I did, based upon the numbers that I needed early on, was for sadly the number of cases and the deaths that were occurring in each state. And these are still very critical numbers to understanding what's going on. But a lot of these other APIs have those numbers, but still the example of how to pull data is very helpful. So I'm going to run in Postman for the CDC cases and deaths scrapei collection. Again, we'll load it up here in my Postman client on the right. And so I have a third collection available now. So let's go ahead and minimize these two. I'm gonna star this one so it floats up to the top here, and that helps me focus on this collection. And so this is just one individual request, but what's different about this, if you look, and again, this goes back to kind of the relationship between Postman kind of being a browser for APIs, is got a URL here, but this is a web, an HTML URL. This isn't an API. So if I load this in my browser tab, you'll see it's just the CDC web page that lists the total number of cases, 981,000, man. And then the total deaths were up to 55,000, a pretty sobering number. So these two numbers are here on the web page, and this, if I go back to Postman here, I can hit send, and this loads the HTML for the page. So this really kind of shows the diff between what Postman is as a browser for APIs and what you know as Chrome or Firefox as a browser for the web. Is this shows the view of the HTML for humans, and this is the Postman shows the behind the scenes. This is the HTML that's on the page behind the curtain. And then we've created a little script here. Postman requests allow you to write pre-request scripts that run before you run, and then post-request scripts that run after. And this one's pretty verbose. There's a function in here that allows you to scrape some data, but really you can reverse engineer this and play with this yourself. And this really shows how I scrape the data for the total cases here. And I don't have the proper environment. Let me add an environment. We're just going to call this CDC because we need a basic environment here. So what it's going to do is it's looking for the occurrence of this HTML, which if I actually look in the HTML here, let's see if I can pull it. They keep changing this every couple days, and I don't know if it's to keep me from pulling the numbers or how it's working, but it's not actually doing the find and replace for me. I'm gonna go here. Live coding, folks. Okay, so here's total cases. Here's the HTML that we're looking for. So if we want, see, they changed this. So they changed the HTML, so you have to regularly update this. So it's no longer H2 total cases. It's actually span class. And I'm gonna grab until it reaches that span class. And then I'm gonna actually grab this one for the total deaths. And I still can't believe that number. That's mind blowing.
Yeah, sure is.
Yeah, I saw Hannah, I saw someone note that this is same number of people that died in Vietnam, which really, for me, brings it home big time, because my father was a Vietnam veteran, so it brings it home in a big way. So now I've got the span, and we've got, see, it's not unique. That might be a challenge. Let's see what it runs. Let's actually just see what it does. Now we can click on the visualizer, and it pulled our counts for our cases and our deaths, but we're gonna need a little bit of cleanup because they've kind of made the HTML a little not as unique as it could be. So rather than writing the code to clean that up here, hopefully this demonstrates how it can pull the cases for today. This is 4/29/2020. It's pulling 981,000, and then it's got my number here. I'll have to clean it up so I can write another little function that'll split these and then properly parse them. But it allows me to store that data as part of that and grab that data as a JSON format. And then I can run this collection as a runner manually, or I can set it up as a monitor so it'll actually run each day. And if I set it up as a monitor, you can right click on the collection and you can say run as a monitor. And the monitor will allow you to choose what frequency you want to run this on. And so it'll actually pull that data and then it'll actually store it in my environment. And so it actually will publish this for each day, and it allows me to then grab each day and actually collect that data. But we have lots of other APIs that are already pulling this data, so I don't need that from CDC. But the example should show you how you can use Postman to actually scrape data. And so that's one way that you can grab data from out there, and you can actually use and start making it available in a machine readable way using Postman. And you can start using that to publish APIs. But there's other ways that we can actually help you publish an API using Postman. We'll walk through that. Let's take a pause for a little bit. Any other questions, Hannah? Anything interesting from folks?
Yeah, my favorite one right now is asking if a scrape API is an official term.
Yes, it is, and it's trademarked. No, it's yeah. I mean, I think some people on my marketing team might be questioning my sanity, but yeah, scraping data to produce APIs is a common, extremely common approach. If you look at major acquisitions lately, like Plaid, which is a banking and fintech finance kind of application, that's their bread and butter, scraping banking data for customers and users. In industries like that, it's the dirty secret. Everyone's scraping and to get this data. If it was just available via APIs, all that wouldn't be necessary. And so, yeah, scrape APIs are a valid way in this climate to actually deploy an API, get the data you need, and make it available. I'll work with my marketing team on that, on the branding and naming of that. It is a mouthful. It makes you pause and think when you're saying it or reading it, or trying to make sense of it, which I think is good in my book. But my marketing team might battle me on that. Any other questions?
Oh, that's fun. I think it's one of my favorite terms that I've learned from this project. Another question that I think is fitting to roll into our next section soon is how to make a public API.
Yeah, so I think let's talk about that here. I think that just kind of sets the stage for the next segment. So say I have this data, I either scraped it or I pulled it together in some way. I have another kind of side project that I've actually been doing, trying to pull together the data for. mostly just as a side project to keep me doing something, but also because I like to eat. And is I pulled together a list of restaurants in the Oakland area. I live in Oakland, California, across from San Francisco. And this is a JSON response or JSON object of four restaurants in the area that are still taking, accepting orders and doing curbside pickup in this environment. And so I wanted to start an API that people can pull from and actually build applications on this. And this one's for Oakland. I intend to do it for Berkeley and for other places, but let's start with Oakland. So if I go back to my Postman client here, and I'm going to create a new tab, a new request, and I'm going to make a request to an API I'm going to call, whoops, I'm writing requests as I'm creating a request in my brain. I'm going to call this restaurant, and I'm going to create a query parameter called city, which I'm going to call Oakland. And so this is my API, my fictional API in my head that I want to call. When I'm out doing the research, I mean, ideally this API would already exist, and but I want to pull restaurants for the city of Oakland. And then I'm going to hit save on this request. I'm going to give it a name. We're going to call it restaurants. And I need to add it to a collection rather than one of my existing collections. So I'm going to just call this collection restaurants. I'm going to hit save to restaurants. And then now you can see I'm going to star this collection because it should be up top. And I have a restaurants API endpoint, but it doesn't do anything. If I hit run on it, it's going to just couldn't get any response. I don't have an API. It's just make believe. But if I want to go up to examples here up on my save button, you can add examples of what a response would look like for this API. I'm going to add an example. Whoops. I'm going to add an example, and I'm going to paste my JSON here for my 4 restaurants. And it's got a name of my examples called restaurants. It's got a get and my path that I gave it. Because I'm an API nerd and I'm very nerdy about these things, I want it to also have a 200 status code response because it should be proper HTTP. And then my header should also have a content type because I use my content types of application JSON. So this response that I'm returning is going to be a JSON response. I think I got it. There we go. Because it treats it differently if it knows the content type. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, close out my example. I still can't call this yet because there's no actual API there. But what I can do is I can click on my little action bar here for my restaurants collection. And I can say mock this collection. And I'm going to call my mock server restaurants. And then this is where I can choose an environment if I'm going to use an environment. I'm not for this demo. And then you can choose to make this public or private. If you make it private, you have to have a Postman API key to access it. And you can access that as part of your account, your profile for your Postman account. But if you just want to leave it public, you can make it public, and it makes it a little easier for people who know the URL to actually access. And I'm going to make this one public. And then it gives me a URL here. So right here, this is the URL of my mock server. I'm going to go ahead and click on it, and it loads it in another tab. But I'm just going to copy and paste it, and I'm going to close this tab because I've already got my API here. I'm going to go back. I'm going to add that URL to it. So it's got a full URL of my mock server plus my path to the restaurants for the city of Oakland. I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and I'm going to hit send. And now I have an actual API response for this. Now, if I want to grab this URL, I can go over here to my browser. I can paste it in, and I can see that JSON in the browser. It's a public API. It doesn't require authorization. So I can share that URL with users, or I can also choose to publish documentation for my new collection. So when you're publishing docs, there's a lot of details you can choose. You can change the color of your template and your theme. You can add it to the Postman network so it gets more discoverability, but I'm just going to publish it because I'm not interested in all that. I just want this URL here. And this gives me my documentation. Now I'm going to share this with other users because then they can come here, they can grab this collection, they can run in Postman and do exactly what I'm doing here in their Postman environment. So it makes my mock API very real. Now there's limitations on a mock server, especially a public one. You're only going to be able to make a certain amount of calls to it. And if it's publicly available and you're sharing with a wide audience, that can be used up pretty quickly. So this is not meant for production APIs. This is just meant for really quick APIs that you need to get out the door, that you need to mock and share with people and get your applications built. You should probably look at other ways of actually delivering this API, which I'll talk about again in a little bit as once we talk about the blueprints that we used as part of this. But I will pause there, take a drink of my tea here, and ask if there are any more questions. Hannah, any other good ones?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions about JavaScript here, as well as other languages. Could you share a little bit more about how the various languages would work in this situation?
Well, so let's start with JavaScript because that's the real kind of center of the world for a lot of things. So when it comes to Postman itself, the scripting language is JavaScript. So if you're writing a pre-request script or a test script, it's in JavaScript. Let me go back to my scrape API here because it's got the actual script in there. This is JavaScript. So there are some limitations because it's in a kind of controlled environment. So we don't allow you to just bring in any library. But there are many ways that you can hack that and load libraries yourself. But this is JavaScript. This allows you to write JavaScript that manipulates either the request you're about to make or the response of that request, allowing you to grab the value. Here's a JavaScript command that grabs whatever content is returned. And that's how I'm able to parse it and work with it here. So JavaScript is kind of at the center of it. But when it comes to defining any API, so if I go back to my restaurant collection, you're looking at any individual request, you can look right here next to your save button. There's a code button. And this will pop up. And what this gives you is a whole list of almost every top programming language, the code you'll need to actually make a request to that API. So if I click, I start with a curl command. It gives you a curl. I can look at Java. Here's a Java one. Here's a native Node.js. Here's a PHP curl command. So this gives us, it puts in the URL to my mock server, and then it gives me all the details that I need to make that command in PHP. And you can see there's quite a few here. There's different platform flavors of PHP. There's PowerShell, Python, Ruby. And so this is client-side code that for each API. And this is across the board. Any collection that is defined here using Postman will have that code and those snippets. But one thing, let's go back here actually to our, did I close the documentation? Let's just click on the URL here. So if I'm looking at the documentation page, when you land on any Postman docs, you can look here and there's the example response available here. And why isn't my code snippets showing? I normally have code snippets right there. So this is a curl command by default. Wow, that's interesting. I've never seen that. Oh, here it is. They moved it. Sorry. Usability, new feature release. So up here top, you have your environments, you have the column layout, and then you have the code snippets. And you can click and it's got all of those code snippets again. So if I want to see the Node.js, I can change it and it shows my example and it shows the Node.js here. So yeah, there's a lot of language possibilities when it comes to working with APIs.
Cool. I have one more quick one, slightly of vested interest considering my background. Do you need to know how to code or be a really competent coder to use Postman or do these projects?
No, and that's why I love it. You need to not be timid. You need to not be worried about breaking things. But no, I consider Postman to be a low code environment. It's not no code because we do have our pre-request and post-request scripts here. So you can write code. But if you look at your test here, you can click on this little arrow and you can get a whole bunch of suggestions. So if you need to know how to check for a status 200 code, here it is. And this type of scripting, see, I'm not an engineer. I'm a reverse engineer. So I learn from other things and other things that exist. So I reverse engineer what's going on in the world around me. That's what collections are perfect for, is you can go to our resources page, find any of these collections where I've written JavaScript or someone else has, and you can reverse engineer that and start playing with it. And that's what really makes Postman pretty powerful in my book is that kind of shared learning when it comes to things. So that's really the purpose of Postman, is to allow you to make requests to APIs without writing code, because even programmers don't like writing code to make every single API request. There's a lot of redundant work there, but it also opens up for non-developers to come in here and actually wreak havoc and do the damage, and I like that. So
Yeah,
yeah. So hopefully, so Anna, I'm gonna keep pushing you to get in here and help. She's helped me work on building out all of these collections, and the one we're going to show you next is a pretty sophisticated example. And she's been helping me work it and run it. And I'm going to keep pushing her to understand how they work and how they do what they do. And I'm pretty sure you'll be a programmer soon.
Yeah, I've already learned a lot from this project. So full disclosure to everyone listening along, I'm still fairly new at Postman. And as a community manager, I don't have that much of a development background. So being able to walk through all this with our team on the project and have such an awesome, tangible example has just, been incredible for my learning process, and a really good way to figure out who else can contribute to these projects or use these in ways that feel productive and useful. So I'm pleased, and I hope you all who are newer to this can follow along as well.
And in my mind, users like you are some of the most valuable, especially when it comes to businesses. And that's why I use that analogy of Postman as a browser / spreadsheet for crunching numbers. Is most people I know are spreadsheet literate in the world. Most developers aren't, and most companies that I've worked at, almost all the business gets done in spreadsheets. And any initiative where I've worked to go around and get people involved is I go around to people who work in spreadsheets and I say, hey, here's some JSON, here's the CSV. And oh, I'm not a programmer. Like, show me what you do in Excel, or show me what you do in Google Sheets. And they show me, I'm like, you're writing macros, you're doing formulas, you're a programmer. I'm sorry, but no one's just ever called you a programmer. So if you're spreadsheet literate, you can become Postman literate. So I'm going to keep pushing on you, Hannah, to go down this road, and I'm going to get Hannah to do more storytelling around this. So hopefully she can inspire the rest of you to jump in as well.
Sounds good. I'll report back.
We'll make a community thing out of this. So let's dive back in. So kind of keeping to our outline, we kind of walk through all the collections, the informational, the COVID APIs. There's quite a few other ones here if you want to pull news. Create a lot of Twitter collections for pulling all the data from different health department Twitter accounts. There's a lot of examples here, a lot to learn from. But if you scroll down past those collections, this is what Hannah was talking about when she mentioned blueprints. Is as I was creating these types of collections, I started seeing some common patterns emerge. And you can see the web scraping to API, or ScrapeAI, is here as a blueprint, because it's not just the example I gave for pulling CDC numbers or WHO numbers. You could do that for any web page. It's a blueprint that you could copy. You could fork that collection, run it in Postman, and reverse engineer it. Now, as we were gathering data, we realized there's other ways that people are going to be gathering data. And one of the most common ways, kind of building on what I just said, is using spreadsheets. Most of the world's business data exists in spreadsheets. I know database people want to think they're the center of the world, but spreadsheets are where it happens. And we had a list of challenges that we wanted to try to solve within Postman. And we picked one of the hardest, I would say, to try to apply this blueprint to. And so we wanted to deploy an API for a data set that we thought was needed, but using Google Sheets as the backend storage. So we chose COVID-19 testing locations because as we were scanning, the need for testing locations kept popping up on our list, but there was no API for it. There was no data set like the CDC numbers. So, but we could see people sharing on Twitter. We saw news reports by Google that there was testing locations out there. And so we needed humans to step in and help us gather this data. And so we created a set of Google Sheets. So I'm going to open up here on my left-hand side, Google Sheets, and we created a set of Google Sheets, one for each state that we could actually enter in testing location data. Now, when you first look at this, you're like, wow, 50 sheets. Wow, that's a lot of work. And it is. Hannah will admit it's pretty cumbersome to work with. But it's for a purpose because this is crowdsourced and we're gonna have different people from different states working in here. We wanted to use Google Sheets permissions to kind of keep those separated so people wouldn't step on each other's toes. So we have people diving in working on Alabama while there's someone else working on Colorado. And this is what she talks about is we could really use some help, people who want to make a difference and make a change and can help us do some of this data entry and cleanup that's required to do this. And so if you open up one of these sheets, you'll see that we have it broken down into several worksheets. We have organizations, we have locations, we have physical address, we have phone, and we have regular schedule. And then we added one called source. So where do we find this data? Because we like that kind of provenance. And so this seems, again, we got 5-6 sheets. Wow, cumbersome. But this is for a reason, because many locations are managed by one organization or multiple organizations. Locations might have a handful of different physical addresses or phone numbers or schedule availability. And so this format that we chose is actually called Open Referral. And it's a 211 format for sharing health and human services. And so this is actually a city standard. You're aware of 911 for emergencies. 311 is for non-emergencies, potholes, trash in the streets. 211 is for health and human services. How do you find food banks? How do you find clinics? And testing location data is a health and human services. So we adopted an existing standard to make this more usable by entities. So we have this data in one sheet, but we needed that to be available as an API. So we've got our 50 states, we've got our data. How do we actually make that available? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close up my existing here. I'm in a demo workspace, but I have a workspace that I set up with my team for the COVID-19 testing. Actually, we've got several workspaces for different parts of the work, but COVID-19 testing is where we're specifically doing the work around this project to help isolate things and keep our team organized. And that's what workspaces really are all about. So we have on the left hand here, I've got a COVID-19 testing location collection. And what this does is this is a collection that'll let me configure the management of this data. There's one that we have to define what state we're working with, and we have to grab the URL of the sheet and paste it in here. But this configures what we're working with. And if we're using environments to kind of manage the state of this. So we have one environment for each state. So if I load up California, I can configure it here. And then I can pull that data from each of those individual sheets just from the California Google Sheet. And it pulls the orgs, the locations, addresses, phones, and schedule here. Pulls it into this environment and stores it temporarily. Then it builds a collection It adds California to this collection because we're going to publish this as an API. And so we need a separate collection, not just for managing, but for accessing the data. And this is what we're going to share with the public. So builds that collection, and then it publishes it to GitHub, that data to GitHub. And I'm going to open up my GitHub here. Here's a GitHub repo where you can actually, this is public, you can find all of this data. Here's a listing of all of the APIs that we're publishing. And if I look at California, I can click on the complete, which is the top of the list, and it's a JSON representation in Open Referral format of all of my entries. So it's got the information about the location, it's got the physical address, the phones, and the schedule in a standardized format. So it's this collection. I can then run these as runners, or I can run them on a schedule using monitors. And so I'm going to show you real quick how I can run California as a runner. So if I choose using, this is a runner screen, I choose testing locations. Here's all of these requests that get made that I walked you through kind of in a one list. You don't need to change anything. I just choose the environment for California, and then I hit run. And it's going to run all of those requests. It's going to configure it, know that it's California. It's going to pull the data from the Google Sheet. It's going to create that collection, and then it's going to publish those to GitHub. So it's not a real API as in what developers would think of. It's published this data to GitHub here, but they're JSON, and you can pull these like it's an API and use it in applications. So now we were able to take 50 spreadsheets, one Postman collection, 50 environments, and publish all of that data to GitHub. We had our data. So to demonstrate what's possible with that, if you go back to the COVID-19 page, this is our Google Sheets to API blueprint. You can apply this for any situation. This isn't just for COVID-19 testing locations like we did. You could do it with election data. You do it with other disaster recovery. You could do it just one sheet for one specific. You don't have to do 50 sheets. You don't have to do an entire US example. But if you scroll down, you'll see down here, we have our COVID-19 testing location. And you can actually see what we've done with this data. You can actually find by state and actually see all that data pulled from the API. You can view all the California locations, and you can see the name, the description, the address, the telephone number, the language, and then the schedule here, all in a consistent format that allows it to be easily worked with. And so that gives us our full end-to-end example of the Google Sheets to API model that takes data, allows non-developers, non-technical folks to crowdsource this data. So if you want to jump on and help, we can plug you in. And then this collection actually manages the pulling, the publishing of that as an API so that it can be used in not just our own testing location microsite, but any web or mobile application. So hopefully that gives you a nice example of Google Sheets API, but we have other models here. If you really need help publishing a real full-blown API on Amazon, Azure, Google, or Heroku, we're happy to point you in the right direction. We're building collections for helping manage that. And then so if you need help there, feel free to let us know. But hopefully that gives you a nice overview of what we're talking about. Here's a bunch of APIs to help you. And here's some blueprints that you can use to deploy APIs to fill in the gaps when you don't have what you need. And so that's kind of the scope of what I wanted to show you. There's a lot more under the hood. If you have questions, I recommend heading over, either emailing us, as Hannah said, or you can come to Postman Labs COVID-19 APIs, and we have a GitHub issues here where we're managing this work. And as you can see, we've got a lot of API tasks available. So we've got about 25 open tasks for taking existing APIs and publishing Postman collections. And then as these get completed, we tag them for adding to the list. So we've already got 3 that are ready to be added to the list. And so we'll be making sure these get added here shortly.
Okay. So if you have some testing locations you'd like to see added to the site, please feel free to email us at covid-19@postman.com. If you'd also like to get in on this and have access to the Google Docs and really jump in, please also email us there and we can get you started. And all the examples we've shown so far have been within the US. We definitely want to keep adding testing locations from other countries as well. So if you want to take the charge on that or even just send some things in, let us know. If you are going to submit some testing locations, we need some data for you to actually flesh this out. So we'll need both the full testing location and address. Most importantly, a link to a reputable source on this, something confirming that, hey, this site is accurate and currently available. A phone number if possible, as well as hours operating if known. And importantly, we've also launched Postman for Nonprofit, so some support for nonprofit organizations that are helping out with the COVID-19 response efforts. So if you're an eligible nonprofit, so in the US, that means you must be registered as a 501c3. You could qualify for up to 10 free Postman businesses licenses, and then we can also provide discounts for additional licenses thereafter. We have an application form for that in the COVID-19 API Resource Center page. That URL is listed here. And we're also going to share a list of the important links a little bit further in the slide deck. So yeah, just to recap, there are a bunch of ways that you could contribute to this. We've got our main resource list. There are ways to contribute on GitHub as well as the testing locations. And then if you want to take further part in the Postman community, we have a forum that's fairly active. You can ask all sorts of questions and either our support team or other community members can jump in. We have the very popular API network that has a bunch of different lists of APIs that company and people have submitted. And you can visit us on GitHub, sorry. We have a number of open source projects, including our documentation that we'd always love to see more from. We also have a survey for you all, just to kind of go over some things we learned in the webinar, some feedback, as well as asking some questions about the ways you'd like to participate in the Postman community. And that leaves us some more time for Q&A. So I've gathered a handful of questions here. So importantly, do we need to have related software along with Postman in order to run any of these APIs?
No, that's the beauty of APIs is APIs are meant to be, cross-platform, distributed and multilingual. So the goal is you shouldn't need too much tooling. Now that's not always true. There are situations where APIs require you to have things, specific technology or knowledge, but all of these, aside from authorization, you shouldn't need any other third-party tools.
Cool. Okay. So a couple more questions. Let's see here. Are there any existing collections with visualizations set up? They're hoping some examples or samples that they could learn from with the visualization.
Yeah, so if you go to the Postman network, just Google Postman network, you can, or explore.postman.com, you can find a whole list of official API collections from different API providers, as well as what's called templates. And if you look under templates, type in visual, you'll see there's quite a few visualization templates. And I really didn't go into too much detail. I would like to do more visualization work on top of some of these collections. But when you get JSON response back from any of these APIs, there's another tab in Postman that allows you to visualize that data, and you can write JavaScript that uses various visualization libraries to help display that. And so it really helps, again, for non-developers. Well, I would say developers and non-developers to work together to make sense of this. A developer can write the script, make it very visual, and then non-developers can run the request in the collections and see the results. So I recommend going to the network. There's a lot of examples there, and then in our knowledge center, there's other documentation that'll help you.
Awesome. So what sort of APIs does Postman support? Specifically, do we support gRPC-based services?
Not currently. So right now, it's got to be an HTTP API. Some gRPC APIs will be HTTP, but as far as the serialization that occurs, we don't support that. So no, we don't support gRPC or HTTP2 currently, or WebSockets, but there's a lot of talk on the roadmap about those. Currently, we support HTTP, which is generally REST, but also SOAP and GraphQL. You can make calls to those APIs. So it's just in that sphere of APIs right now, but we're pushing to get other protocols in the roadmap. So stay tuned.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken, for explaining all that. We have a bunch more questions here that we'd love to help answer. So we might get in touch with you after the fact. Please feel free to keep sending some in. And again, at any time, email us at covid-19@postman.com. So here are the important links that we've mentioned. Our resource center, the COVID-19 APIs at postman.com. If you're able to make it there, you'll be able to find the rest of these. Testing locations is linked in there, GitHub's all in there, as well as our email address. And I also want to do a big shout out for everyone that's already contributed to this project. So it's been going for a couple of weeks now. This is one of the first times we've been promoting it a bit more and asking for more contributions. So already we have a bunch of community members that have submitted testing locations, API collections, all sorts of things, sending in big questions. So thank you so much for all these people around the world. We've also had a lot of the Postman team jump in, everywhere from our office manager and HR specialist to engineers and developer relations, as well as we just supported CalHack's virtual hackathon called Hack Now, and a bunch of students were able to use all these resources as well. So thanks a bunch for everyone stepping in. All right. And that is about our time. Ken, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I want to second to the contributors. Thank you for everyone who's helped. It's been amazing and a little overwhelming. Everyone kind of stepping up. I look forward to that continuing to grow. And then thank you, Hannah, for doing this with me today. It's been fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Super fun.